Welcome to Synechron State of Tech podcast. I'm Eklove Mohan, Senior Director of Technology at Synechron, and today I'm joined by Christopher Liccardi, Principal Security Architect Leader at IBM. So let's start from cybersecurity, the area of your interest. As the cloud adoption grows, so does the risk. How do you see financial industry coping up with that?
It's an interesting topic, and it's becoming a real hot button issue in a lot of industries, especially in financial services. We're seeing that risk is becoming a big part of the decision matrix for either enhancing, adding, or starting a cybersecurity program. A lot of that risk, I think organizations rely on some sort of compliance requirement that generates the risk mitigation, as opposed to looking at the risk from, we know we have multiple cloud vendors and we're sending data into multiple places and we've got multiple development teams. It's kind of everybody's fend for yourself until a requirement comes in that we have to comply to. Then an internal audit happens. We find that we're not as secure as we thought we were. And now we have to go back and dig out of that tech debt and dig out of that risk debt and figure out how do we do it better going forward, and then hope that we don't repeat that same mistake the next time a new technology gets introduced into the organization.
Sure, that's an interesting perspective. But how do you cope up with it with Gen AI kind of technologies where things are very unknown? For cybersecurity, again, it becomes a bit of a challenge, coping up with all these things, ensuring that the organization is not only reactive, but at least proactive as well for something they have not seen altogether.
So I'm seeing it happen in 2 or 3 different flavors. And the 2 big ones that come to mind often are, we're either going to completely ignore AI, we'll ban it from the firewalls and we'll keep it from the edge, and we'll put out announcements that say you can't use AI, which means that every new tool update that every vendor on the market currently builds AI into things slows down into the deployment process. We can't get it in fast enough because now we have to enforce a governance protocol on where does the AI go and how does the model get trained, and where, is the vendor taking my data and using it for another company? And I see the other side of that coin is a lot of companies, a lot of the fintechs out there are jumping in and saying, look, if it's got AI, install it and see what happens. And they're looking at it, I think they're looking at it in a very human way. They're looking at it, how do I force multiply? How do I reduce manual workload? How do I get my smarter people doing smarter things instead of doing all of these manual things? And I think in that particular avenue, while it is more agility and movement and being able to conquer technical challenges and tech debt challenges faster, I think that there's going to be at some point kind of a reckoning when we go back and someone will adhere to, or as I said before, they'll apply a requirement, some kind of compliance requirement, and then we're going to have to go back and dig out of that tech debt again. We saw the same thing when cloud adoption became a really big deal about 10 years ago. Everybody's like, oh, you can use cloud. And then it's, well, you can use a couple of clouds. Now everything's in the cloud. And then trying to track where all of those disparate threads go introduces its own challenges with identity and access management and governance capability and then data storage. And it's just, it becomes a ballooning process that if we don't kind of wrangle it together now and think through it in a very strategic way, we are going to be digging out of that hole again with AI in a couple of years.
Absolutely. And so the traditional approaches of looking at the dashboard and looking at the security vulnerabilities that are there, has that approach changed with AI, or would it be the same approach going forward as well?
So again, I think there's a duality to this, that some organizations, especially in financial services, are looking at, can AI tell us what's not important? Which is it's not a terrible approach, but it needs to be metered with a little bit of common sense. My career started in the vulnerability management industry, so I started with 10,000 pages of vulnerabilities from some of the more common tools that are out on the market, knowing that in 2 lifetimes I'd never get through them. AI is helping us kind of eliminate some of those, going, yeah, that's really not likely to happen, or you don't have enough of the right components, or this is, we're not seeing this truly in the wild. But I think the hardcore vulnerability evangelists, the ones that are trying to prevent the security problems from happening, they're still very much stuck in that, let's drown in telemetry. We've got tools for cloud and tools for SaaS and tools for on-prem, and none of the tools all speak the same language, but all with very different slang and dialect. And trying to get a force multiplier in place without hiring more staff, which is a huge challenge right now. We're not moving as fast as we can because we're trying to hold on to the traditional, but yet utilize some of the modern tools to help us get through it faster. And then the gaps that don't quite meet up in the telemetry, we just kind of push them aside and go, it's an unknown and we'll get to it eventually. Or when somebody finally complains about it, you will work through it. One of the fintechs I'm working with right now, one of the biggest in the industry, they have a mandate that there's no Sev 4, Sev 5 patches ever in the system more than 20 days, which is incredible. It's a great model if you can adhere to it. Now, if I take out all the legacy applications, anything that sits in the Z space, anything that the developer retired in 1974, all of the cloud apps can be patched very quickly, but they come with their own challenges of break fix. And I'm working with a client right now where they are patching for a supposed vulnerability. It's not been proven in the wild, but it's something that came up on a report. And every time they apply the patch, we're on a call from 8 to 10 every morning because it broke something else. Because they're not thinking through the diversity of ecosystems, such as 3 different cloud providers, and they're in Kubernetes in 2 different varieties, and they've got 5 vendors supporting the application. So I think it's a bit of a challenge, but I do think the industry is looking for kind of that moniker superhero to come in with a tool that says, hey, if you do these things, you're pretty good and you can do them faster, more efficiently, and you won't spend as much time on these break fix calls or, worrying about whose job's on the line next because something is vulnerable.
Okay, that's a very interesting perspective. Thanks for sharing that thought. Innovation is, again, one of the important topics that all the financial services industries are looking for. But at the same time, when we look at the surveys, we see that there is a lot of tussle between the CFOs and the CTOs in terms of the budget and the spend that they are making on cloud. How do I overcome that? How do you think that the gap between what CFO thinks and the CTO thinks in an organization can be bridged?
That's the $1 million question, and it's a good question. And we have this conversation certainly from a vendor's perspective, but as a former deputy CISO, having been in the industry and moved around financial services for a while, it's need versus want, and the CTOs need to keep innovation moving. They need to keep technology built going. They need to reduce tech debt, and the CFO or the CFO's office wants to do everything based on $0, zero-based budgeting, which is really a challenge because we can say, yeah, we'd like to upgrade that technology or we'd like to move from brick and mortar to the cloud ecosystem. And I think when it first came out, everybody's like, oh, cloud, so much easier. I can get rid of a data center. Okay, cool. The data center costs me, let's say, $5 million a year to run. Now we're looking at expanding cloud costs, and the CFO's office is stepping in and going, wait a second, we just gave Amazon $100 million to replace a $5 million data center. And I think part of that agility and where we're seeing a win in getting through that conversation is taking the business units, sitting them down and doing a business value type assessment, even if it's just, a moderated one, to say, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What is your primary objective? What is the route to get there? And then instead of enforcing a governance, we're asking what governance they'd adhere to. If you've got 3 business development teams that operate in 3 different languages and they like 3 different clouds, is there a common barrier there that we can get through to say, we'll put this type of app in Azure and we'll put this type of storage in Google because those are the most cost effective that we can play with. And then applying security in between the two so that we're not exposing ourselves in one way or another, but taking those projects in a what's most cost effective but accomplishes that primary goal, and then working through that, not in an unrealistic timeline. We're going to upgrade all of application X in 6 minutes or less. Can you instantiate cloud quickly? Yes. Does that mean your developers can move that fast? The answer is usually no. So how do we break it down so that over the course of 12, 24, 36 months, we're starting to see milestones go through, and then going back to that business value assessment and saying, okay, this was the objective, here's the value of moving, here's the value of non-movement. And we're meeting those goals almost on an agile basis, like a week at a time or 2 weeks at a time or a month at a time, so that we can say, look, we're conquering and we're reducing and we're turning up and then we're reducing, so that the CFO's office has buy-in, that we're not just adding more money to the spend.
Yeah.
And then they see that in the next DLA renewal, the next license renewal, or they get the next bill of goods and go, what happened?
It's one of the challenges that we are also seeing at Synechron, that most of our customers are facing the same kind of a problem. And especially, again, with the current era that we have, where when serverless was introduced at that point of time, we talked about that now you don't have to pay for when you're not using it. It's based on the instances. Now things have become even more complicated because we are talking about models. We are talking about per token charges, how many tokens would be there? You never know. Again, the rift between the CFO and the CTO seems not to be diluting anymore, but it's still creating a lot of rift
Well, I think
because of the
yeah,
unsettled nature that is there.
and I think this is the first time in the, what do they call this now, the second age of technology, the third age of technology. I think this is the first time where we've been able to be line of code accountable for what we do and what does it cost us. Yeah. And I think we saw this in the beginning of the cloud boom a couple of years ago of go out and develop in any language. And there's dozens of languages that are either low code, no code, they're easy to instantiate. And I equate it to the don't worry about it, I'll bill you later. And then that bill you later thing that's where the CFO's office is going, okay, we need accountability. We need to be able to target something and we need to know who's going to be responsible for keeping an eye on the spend governance. Like what is the next thing going in? And I think as we see the newer generation of technology professionals, developers, coders, architects, engineers coming in, they're looking to move quickly. They're looking to move as fast as they can to accomplish the goal. They're not necessarily looking to do it in an economical way, the way you would see like a data center manager or a DB manager say, okay, this is really cool, but it's going to cost us, $10 million. And maybe it could be less cool, but still cool at half that.
So moving on, one of the important topics, at least outside of the industry, is about sustainability. When we look at the surveys, we see that sustainability is still not highest priority for the organizations, irrespective of whether it is financial services or the other industries. How do you think that FinOps can be integrated with sustainability? Because the overall impact on the environment is pretty huge.
Fantastic question. I was just having a debate about this topic yesterday with a colleague of mine. There were several sustainability requirements that were pushed into the United States, and they seem to have vanished in the last couple of months. But their dates were rolled back to 2036, 2040. And some of the bigger organizations are pushing forward to meet those requirements. They still want to meet them before the target deadline that was originally introduced. I think part of the confusion or part of the struggle is when I say things like financed emissions and LEED certification and understanding sustainable energy usage, there aren't departments like if I were to say cybersecurity architecture or Java code development lead. Those have very specific people that have very specific tasks that they know what to do with. I think in sustainability, you're talking about going to public relations, or you're talking about going into an environmental office that's still relatively new in most organizations. So putting a fence around it and not making it quite so amorphous, it would help bring that closer to control. And I know there's quite a few vendors out there that are now introducing sustainability related features in their software. Yeah. They tell you what your data center is going to use to run a certain set of applications. It's not built into our current technology ecosystem. It's bolted on. And when I go to a data security manager, or I go to a data center operator, or I go to a CFO's office and say, I'd like to bolt on one more agent to monitor how much energy you're using or how sustainable this server stack is. It's one more thing to build, to deploy, to test, to patch, and then the cycle starts all over again. Whereas if there's no hardened requirement, or if those requirements have been kind of slackened off a little bit, then there's no impetus to do it now. Yeah. So we'll do it when it becomes a requirement, because we've got so many other things that we have to do. I think the key to changing that is to get in front of your technology professionals. And we did this years ago with cybersecurity, where we made cybersecurity every employee's job, not just the cybersecurity team, or not just a series of architects and engineers. We need to get in front of those technology business units and say, okay, sustainability is your job as well. How can we do it not just cheap, but how can we do it efficiently for both us and for the planet? How do we make it less of a burden on the entire total ecosystem moving forward as you build the next thing or the greatest upgrade, or decide which is the next avenue you want to take with your stack? Absolutely.
So do you think that the KPIs that the business are monitoring, not only in terms of the business features or the performance SLAs and stuff, they should include sustainability as well with the FinOps operations that are there?
I think it should be built into our vernacular. As if we're looking at cost efficiency and we're looking at performance efficiency, I think we should also look at sustainability as part of that, as like a trifocal lens of how good is this for not only my business, but then how good is the business for the planet? And I think when you start to see companies like Subaru who are going all green by the end of 2040, I think is their announcement, even their factories are going to be 100% recycled energy and recycled components. If building a car can be efficient, then running a server should not be a challenge. It's just, we have to, I think if we start having that conversation as part of the, how do I do better? What's new, what's next? I think that has to be on the list.
Yeah. Even the cloud providers are putting a lot of emphasis in terms of their data center using renewable energy. Europe, you see most impact of that, where France is coming up with 100% renewable energy and others as well. So hopefully things will change and people will start thinking about sustainability along with the FinOps.
That would be the hope. And we are seeing a lot of our European contingents for our American clients. They're 100% or 99% sustainable, and they were there a year ago, 2 years ago, and we're kind of just going, yeah, we'll get there.
Absolutely. Okay, so in terms of, like you were talking about the Java developers as well, that they also need to be cognizant about sustainability and even the FinOps in terms of what they are using, how they are utilizing it. Do you think that there are some training programs, certifications that each of these individuals need to do to be more aware about what they are getting into and how they can prevent it?
We have stepped away in the last few years from certification in a lot of technology, cybersecurity development, a lot of that ecosystem, in favor of, can we move quickly and get to market faster? Now, do I need a CISSP to be good at this job? No, but the certificate tells you that I have committed to learning the most up-to-date, most current, and I stay with it. I have to maintain that over the course of every year. If we're talking at that development level, I think requiring some commitment from the developer to learn the better way, to learn what's the newest inclusion that we have to have, whether it's sustainability, smarter code, not spreading out over 5 clouds because you ran into a concern with one cloud and it wasn't working the way you wanted it to. I think that commitment to training and excellence, that commitment to being good, and then tomorrow being better, and then the day after that being better than that, we've stepped away from those. I think bringing those back in, it becomes a commitment to self that we're going to get it done faster, but we'll also know that when we're taking a wrong step, we'll have that spidey sense in the background going, this is not the best way to do this, or we're completely omitting what are we doing for the sustainability aspect, or am I sidestepping cybersecurity by going to some pop-up vendor that's allowing me to do a thing much faster? Like, I think that when we don't have that training, we don't have that certification, we don't have that commitment, it becomes harder to maintain that. And it makes it almost unfair for companies that don't sponsor that kind of continued education or training. They require employees to be better, faster, smarter than they are, but we're not training them. We're telling them to sit down in front of their computer for 8 to 10 hours a day and just click, So it's almost like regimented exercise. I can't expect myself to be better, to be able to run faster, lift more, have higher endurance if I don't do anything to earn it. And I think we've stepped away from that earn it process that we have to get back into.
Okay. So one of the ways that we have been using internally as well to make developers more concerned about the kind of code that they're writing, because even if you write a for loop, it has an impact on the environment because the number of cycles that it is going through the CPUs and all those kind of things. So the way that we have been following is more about training the people, making them aware that this is where you are making a mistake. Probably there's a better way of doing it. You can look at that. We also have a concept of calling the speakers, specifically on the sustainability side, to talk about that how the environment can be a better place with still all these technological advancements that are there. But at the same time, you yourself have some responsibilities associated with that. At least be a little cognizant about that.
Yeah.
So
that's a good approach. I'm seeing approaches like that where we're making personal accountability in some of my clients very, very specific. They're going into development pods or they're looking at specific languages going, this was great, but, and we went the same direction kind of in security when open source became a really big deal, where everybody's like, oh, I'm just going to go grab the quickest code to get the thing done. It's inefficient. It introduces security problems. It's not the best way to do it. It is the fastest way isn't always the best way, but enforcing that the organizations enforce an actual, let's sit down and talk about the idea. Let's talk about its implementation. Now it's deployed. Let's talk about, is this the best approach? And learning to fail faster, it helps build that accountability so that we can go back and go, oh, that was blockheaded. I'm going to go back and do something, we're going to do it a slightly different way. And I think that builds that kind of that personal accountability of what did I do to make it better versus what did I just do?
Yeah, exactly. Great. Thank you, Chris. It was nice talking to you. And thank you to our listeners to tuning into this episode of Synechron's State of Tech podcast series. Stay tuned for our next episode.